On the cold morning of October 15th, 1917, Mata Hari stood before 12 French rifles. Refusing the blindfold, she looked her executioners straight in the eyes. Some swore she blew a kiss, others that she smiled. Seconds later, bullets tore through her body, ending the life of the world's most infamous seductress. But was she a traitor, or the ultimate scapegoat of a desperate nation at war? As car speeds through the outskirts of Paris, its destination, the ancient castle of Vincennes. Inside sits a woman whose name is already a legend, whispered in the corridors of power and the smoky cabarets of a continent at war. She isn't dressed in prison rags. She's in a long, black velvet cloak, silk stockings, and high-heeled slippers. This is her final performance. Led to a stake in a muddy field, she faces a firing squad of 12 French soldiers. An officer approaches with a white blindfold. She just waves it away. "Must I wear that?" she asks, her voice steady. The officer, caught off guard, says it's not necessary. So she stands there, unbound and unflinching, looking right at the men about to take her life. As the command to fire rings out, some say she smiled, others that she blew a kiss. Then, the shots echo across the field. This was the end of Mata Hari, executed as the greatest female spy of the century. The French government claimed her treachery cost the lives of at least 50,000 soldiers. But was she really a diabolical traitor who played nations against each other? Or was she something else entirely? A pawn in a much larger game. An amateur who stumbled into a world she didn't understand. And in the end, a convenient scapegoat for a nation drowning in wartime paranoia? Over a century later, the truth is far more complex and more tragic than the legend. And the question remains, was she innocent? Before the world knew her as Mata Hari, the exotic Javanese princess, she was Margaretha Zelle, born in a small Dutch town in 1876. Her life started a world away from the gilded stages of Paris. The daughter of a hat maker, her childhood was comfortable but ordinary. But that comfort shattered when her father went bankrupt and her parents divorced. Desperate for an escape, at just 18, she answered a newspaper ad from a man seeking a wife. His name was Captain Rudolf MacLeod, a Dutch colonial army officer 20 years older than her. For Margaretha, it must have seemed like a lifeline. In reality, it was a nightmare. MacLeod was a violent alcoholic who openly kept mistresses and abused her constantly. Their life together took them to the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, a place that would become key to the identity she would later invent. The toxic marriage was struck by more tragedy. Their son, Norman John, died at age 2. To this day, the cause is debated by historians. Some say it was from complications of syphilis passed down from his father, while others believe he was poisoned. This loss was the breaking point. Margaretha finally left MacLeod. After a bitter custody battle cost her access to her daughter, she made a desperate move. In 1903, with almost nothing to her name, she fled to the one city where a woman could completely reinvent herself, Paris. It was here that Margaretha Zelle died and Mata Hari was born. The name itself was brilliant, meaning Eye of the Day in Malay. She invented an incredible backstory, claiming she was a Javanese princess initiated into ancient, mystical dances. And Paris, a city starving for anything exotic and risque, bought every word. In 1905, she made her debut. Her performances were unlike anything the city had ever seen. They were sensual, hypnotic, and pushed every boundary of public decency. She'd slowly strip away veils and jewelry until she was nearly nude, a scandalous act that made her an overnight sensation. She sold out dance halls and opera houses across Europe, becoming one of the most famous women on the continent. She was no longer Margaretha, the abused wife from a small Dutch town. She was Mata Hari, a living fantasy. But her entire identity was a fragile performance, one that would be impossible to maintain when the fantasy of the era gave way to the brutal reality of war. Mata Hari's fame as a dancer was her ticket into a second, even more profitable career, a high-class courtesan. She became the lover and confidant to some of Europe's most powerful men, millionaire industrialists, politicians, and, most importantly, high-ranking military officers from several different countries. This wasn't just a life of pleasure. For a woman with no family money or formal profession, it was survival. It gave her access, influence, and an independence almost unheard of for women at the time. She lived an incredibly luxurious life, staying in the finest hotels, draped in jewels and furs, and traveling across the continent whenever she pleased. But this gilded cage was also a fragile one. Her dancing career was built on novelty, and by her late 30s, her star was fading. Her finances were shaky, and her lifestyle depended entirely on the generosity of her powerful patrons. She was famous, but she was also vulnerable. Then, in the summer of 1914, the world changed forever. The assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo plunged Europe into the Great War. Borders that were once open slammed shut. Nationalities that once mixed freely in Paris were now eyed with suspicion. For Mata Hari, a neutral Dutch citizen with intimate ties to powerful men on both sides of the war, this new reality was incredibly dangerous. Her international lifestyle, once a sign of her sophistication, now made her a person of interest to every intelligence agency in Europe. The web of lovers she had so carefully spun was about to become a net, and it was closing in fast. As the war raged, Mata Hari's life took another dramatic turn. Her career was sputtering and money was tight. It was then, at nearly 40, she met the man she would call the love of her life, Captain Vladimir de Maslov, a handsome, 23-year-old Russian pilot serving with the French army. Theirs was a passionate affair, one that gave her a new sense of purpose. But the war that brought them together would soon tear them apart. In 1916, Maslov's plane was shot down over the front lines. He survived but was badly wounded, losing sight in one of his eyes. He was taken to a military hospital in the war zone, an area completely off-limits to civilians, especially a foreign national like her. Mata Hari was frantic. She was desperate to get to his side. That desperation made her vulnerable, and her vulnerability was noticed. Her constant travel and high-profile connections had already put her on the radar of French intelligence. In her search for a travel permit, she met Captain Georges Ledoux, the ambitious head of France's counter-espionage service. Ledoux didn't see a woman in love. He saw a potential asset. Here was a woman who could move in circles no ordinary agent could. She knew powerful Germans, including, the French believed, the German crown prince himself. Ledoux made her an offer that was both a solution and a trap. He told her the French government would help her get to Maslov's bedside. Not only that, they'd pay her 1,000,000 francs, but only if she agreed to use her charms to spy for France. Torn between her love for Maslov and her desperate need for money, she agreed. In her mind, she wasn't choosing a side. She was securing a future for them. She believed she could play the part, just as she had played the Javanese princess. She walked into the shadowy world of espionage, not for politics or patriotism, but for love. It was a fatal mistake. She had no idea how deadly the game was, or that the man who had just recruited her would soon become her chief accuser. With her new mission from the French, Mata Hari traveled to Madrid, a neutral city crawling with spies. Her task was to get close to the German military attaché, Major Arnold Colley, and get information. She did make contact with him, and she did accept money from him. From the French perspective, this was an immediate red flag. Was this part of the plan, or was she being paid by the enemy? Mata Hari would later swear she was loyal to France. She insisted she simply took Colley's money as compensation for personal belongings the Germans had confiscated from her at the start of the war. She claimed the information she gave him was just trivial society gossip, useless things she'd read in the newspapers. But then came the evidence that would seal her fate. French intelligence intercepted radio messages sent from Major Colley in Madrid to Berlin. The messages were sent in a code the Germans knew the French had already broken. They talked about the activities of a German agent, codenamed H-21. The details about Agent H-21 matched Mata Hari so perfectly there was no doubt she was the one being described. For Captain Ledoux and the French authorities, this was the smoking gun. The telegrams seemed to prove she was a double agent, secretly working for the Germans all along. The French would build their entire case on these messages. They would stand before a military tribunal and claim that the intelligence from this one woman, Agent H-21, was directly responsible for the deaths of at least 50,000 Allied soldiers. It was a monstrous accusation, designed to paint her as the most treacherous spy of the century. But for such a devastating claim, they never presented a single piece of concrete evidence linking her to any specific military disaster. The case against Mata Hari looked damning, but a closer look reveals a much more disturbing picture. Let's start with those intercepted German messages. Many historians now believe they were a deliberate setup. The Germans, knowing the French could read their code, intentionally sent incriminating messages about Agent H-21. Why? To make French intelligence think they had caught a master spy. It was a brilliant piece of misdirection, designed to sacrifice a useless agent while distracting the French from the real German spies operating in Paris. In this version of events, Mata Hari wasn't a master spy. She was a pawn, knowingly sacrificed by German intelligence. Then there's Captain Georges Ledoux, the man who recruited her and then pursued her so relentlessly. By 1917, France was on the verge of collapse. Disastrous military offensives had led to widespread mutinies in the army. Morale at home was at rock bottom. The government desperately needed a distraction, a victory, and most of all, a scapegoat to blame for their failures. Securing a high-profile conviction against the greatest spy of the century was a perfect way to divert public anger. Her trial was a legal travesty by modern standards. It was held by a secret military tribunal, closed to the press. Her lawyer wasn't allowed to cross-examine key witnesses. Powerful men who could have testified for her were never called. Evidence was manipulated, and Ledoux himself was later accused of altering translations of the German telegrams to make them sound more incriminating. The prosecutor didn't focus on espionage. He attacked her character. He famously argued, without scruples, accustomed to make use of men, she is the type of woman who is born to be a spy. She was condemned not for what she did, but for what she was, a foreign, sexually liberated, independent woman who broke every rule of the time. Her own naivete definitely played a role. She was a performer, and she couldn't stop playing a part even when her life was on the line. She lied and changed her stories during interrogations, not understanding that this wasn't a performance. But her cry in the courtroom gets to the heart of her tragedy. A harlot? Yes, but a traitoress? Never. She was convicted for her lifestyle, for being the perfect target for a nation desperate for someone to blame. The verdict was no surprise. After a trial built on bias and shaky evidence, the all-male military tribunal took just 45 minutes to find her guilty. The sentence was death. Mata Hari, who had survived so much, was stunned. When her lover, Vladimir de Maslov, was told of her fate, he coldly dismissed her, refusing to help and claiming he never cared for such a woman. On the morning of October 15, 1917, her final day came. Awakened in her cell, she was calm and composed. She carefully dressed in her finest clothes, a chic dress, a hat, and her long, velvet cloak. It was her last act of defiance. She wrote 2 final letters and gave them to her lawyer. At the execution grounds, she faced the firing squad with a courage that stunned everyone present. A journalist noted that she was not bound and refused the blindfold, staring right at her executioners. When the shots rang out, he wrote that she didn't collapse. Instead, Slowly, inertly, she settled to her knees, her head up always. Then she fell backward. An officer then walked up and delivered the final coup de grace with a pistol. In her death, Mata Hari achieved what she always wanted in life: immortality. Her bravery in those final moments cemented her legend, turning her from a convicted spy into a tragic, romantic icon. The woman was gone, but the myth had just begun. In the centuries since her execution, Mata Hari's name has become shorthand for the seductive female spy, the ultimate femme fatale. But history has started to re-examine her case. In 1930, the German government stated she had provided them with no intelligence of any value. Later, when French and British intelligence files were unsealed, they revealed what many had suspected: the evidence against her was flimsy and likely manipulated. Most historians now agree she was, at best, a clumsy amateur who was made a scapegoat for French military failures. So who was she? She certainly wasn't an innocent bystander. She took money from both sides and stepped into the world of espionage out of love and desperation. She was naive and a liar. But was she a traitor? Was she the spy responsible for the deaths of thousands? The evidence says no. Her greatest crime, it seems, wasn't spying. It was being the wrong kind of woman, in the wrong place, at the worst possible time. But what do you think? Was Mata Hari a clever double agent who played dumb? Or was she the ultimate victim, framed by a government that needed a villain? Let us know your theory in the comments below. If you thought the execution of Mata Hari was haunting, wait until you hear about the pharaoh who fed his enemies to crocodiles. A ruler who turned the Nile into a stage of horror, where the snapping jaws of sacred beasts became instruments of royal justice. Click the link above to uncover the reign of terror of the crocodile pharaoh who made death a spectacle. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. Thanks for watching.